I can't help but feel that I will remember for the rest of my life the absolute hush in the building as 20,000 people waited for Mark Davis to tell them whether Luka had fouled out of this game or not. Fucking insane that it came to that, but it really, really did.
I mean, it was bad, but I think if you're Luka Doncic, who's been basically olaying these cats to the freaking rim all game long, to
all
pick
series
that,
long, we should say.
all series long, exactly. To pick that moment to find it in you to try to take a freaking charge just seemed odd and ridiculous to me. I thought, it could have been a bang bang play. I think if you're wearing Mavericks tinted glasses, you could be like, well, Jalen ends up using his off arm. Man, it's a foul. Like, there's nothing wrong with that being called a foul on Luka there. And some of the other fouls he picked up were just, boneheaded,
That's
deadheaded.
the thing. Yeah.
If we're being honest about it.
The bang bang play is one thing, but off the top of my head, he got an offensive foul for blatantly hooking Jaylen Brown when he tried to attack baseline on a play. And he bumped Peyton Pritchard so many times in the backcourt on another sequence that he basically forced the refs to call another foul on him. And so the sixth foul is going to get a lot of scrutiny. Luka postgame said about as much as he was going to say without getting fined in terms of voicing his displeasure with the officiating. I don't really see that much to be upset with. Like, that's really poor situational awareness from the best player on the floor. And he may have cost his team a chance to actually win a very winnable game in the process.
Yeah, this feels like a very Chris Paulian cruel irony where he was undone by some of the things that he technically tries to do throughout the game, that he typically tries to do, like try to work the margins, try to work the refs to the point of almost berating them at times. And it just kind of went back at them. I think the question is, if they had Luka in there, if he didn't pick up those 6 fouls, do you think the game goes the opposite way?
I can't be too sure about that, especially when you consider what Luka's been giving them on defense all series long. I don't know that they weren't upgraded as a defensive unit by Luka hitting the bench. Like, to be honest,
I hear you, but in his place, they put Tim Hardaway Jr. on the floor,
which was not ideal. Tim Hardaway having his primary matchup be Jason Tatum. Not great. Just not great. We would have liked to see Luka close this thing out and actually see him go down losing on the floor, and having come up short or actually having completed the comeback. But I think throughout the course of the game, it's hard for me to feel sympathy for the Mavericks, who are, one, I think the matchup is just a poor one for them. They have a bad matchup. This is not an ideal matchup for them in terms of, this is the first series where their guys, all of their guys, have to actually guard people in space. Every other series, like Luka, Kyrie, everybody, they could funnel people into the paint, into their big men, and, play a more team defense oriented type of game. Whereas in this series, that just wasn't allowed, right? So they have a bad matchup, but I don't know, man. Watching this, their level of execution and attention to detail just is not there. When I'm watching Jason Tatum on damn near 2 consecutive possessions at the end of the half just get behind a defense.
Yeah.
Like, you just don't get back on Jason Tatum at the end of a half for the championship, your season is on the line. Like, I'm sorry. I think their effort in this series has been greatly lacking. I think, look, even if they were executing at their highest level, they might probably still lose this series. But just to see them not be able to play at their best after watching them do things, make adjustments, make the smart play, make the hustle play, all playoffs long, to me, that's the most disappointing part. It feels like, to me, Boston took these guys' heart and their soul and took the fight out of them. That's what it looked like to me. I don't know about you guys.
I want to tease that apart a little bit because I don't really have as much of a problem with the effort. What I see is something that you kind of see as a secondary effect when teams are outmatched, when another team just has more talent, has more at their disposal, has more options. The frustration that comes with that is often that you lose the little things. Like, you lose the little details of your game plan and the little bits of focus and the little bits of execution that you need to actually win. And it makes a bad situation worse. And that's when you get these runaway rallies. That's part of why the Celtics basically have that against almost every team they play against. There will be a point in the game where Boston just runs off, a 15-3 run and blows open a game. It's really inevitable with their style of play and with how much talent they have. I think part of it is that. I think the other part of it, beyond Luka and whatever his complaints may be about the officiating as far as the fouls that were called against him, I thought he spent basically half of this game playing to draw fouls and not playing to make shots.
Yes.
And the result of that often was him on the floor and the Celtics going 5-on-4 the other way. Or some of these breakaways or some of the plays where Tatum or Holiday were able to just get behind the entire Mavericks defense. It's because they're playing outmanned because of the style and ultimately what Luka is trying to sell. And whether you think those are fouls or not, I honestly don't really care. They weren't called. And this is the disadvantage that he sometimes put his team in.
Yeah, I think if they had won just off the back of that 21-point Celtics tsunami, as Mike Breen coined it, I would have said that the Celtics just had too much for the Mavs. Ultimately, I think they still just happened to have too much for the Mavs down the stretch. It just happened in a way that you think would tilt the way in the Mavs' favor. Right? This was a 1-point game with 3:37 to go. That's without Luka. Luka was already out of the game. Mm-hmm. It was pretty much coming down to execution. And the Celtics, as a collective, just outmatched what Kyrie was capable of doing. Kyrie just wasn't nails down the stretch in the way that he probably had to be in order to vault over all of the different options that the Celtics had. And I mean, PJ Washington getting the foul in the backcourt on the screen, which was pretty questionable, but that's still something that kind of tilted things back the other way. And so like the Celtics seemed like they were going to win in the way that we've seen them win so many times this regular season and even in the postseason by completely just overwhelming you with points, right? Working that 3-point advantage, etc. This time, I think they, yet again, just kind of like in game 2, they just executed when it mattered most.
Yeah, they just kind of kept plugging away. And I think that's what's impressive about this win from Boston's perspective. And look, if you're a Celtics fan listening, I would understand your frustration if we're coming out of the gate talking about all these things that the Mavericks didn't do or the way they kind of gave this away. The reality is...
But it's in comparison to what Boston is doing. Boston is executing their defensive assignments to a T on a lion's share of their possessions. Like, so in the first half, Sam Hauser makes those 3 threes. 2 of those threes he just walked into.
Yeah.
Like, it was, they weren't difficult makes. One of them was somebody, drove to the strong side and the guy helped one pass away. And you can say that's kind of a mental mistake, but at least it's like, all right, the guy guarding Hauser was responding to an actual threat.
Right.
The one at the top of the key, he just caught it with nobody near him and fired. That's not going to get it done in the finals. Boston's not playing that kind of defense.
I actually think you might be being too kind even to the Mavs on that first one, because we can roll back the tape. My memory of that play he hit from the corner was Luka basically playing like the middle ground no man's land between the 3-point arc and the lane for basically no reason, as he sometimes does, when his man is Sam Hauser. And like, you gotta stay glued to that. And those are the sorts of details that they absolutely lost in this game. And those are the sorts of details that Boston will beat you on if you do not have absolutely nailed down every second you're on the floor against them.
Yeah, well, one of the things I did as we were waiting hours for Rob to go back to his house was the John Hollinger column that ultimately ended up being quite predictive of where the finals would end up going. He wrote this during the Sloan Conference when the Celtics played the Mavericks the last time post-deadline. And the thrust of it is just that, one, the Celtics' overwhelming amount of three-pointers is just probably too tough to beat. There's just like, they've taken what we know about three-pointers and taken it to the logical extreme, to the point where they're putting out pretty much anyone out there can hit a three-pointer, including Xavier Tillman, who we'll talk about
Shout out to Xavier Tillman.
But the other part of this, which I wasn't really privy to, was it works more effectively nowadays, specifically because you see so many teams choose to sell out at the rim as opposed to deny the three-pointer, right? Because you have to, at this point, choose one of them. And so a team like the Pacers, who goes the other way, is actually a worse matchup for the Celtics than a team like the Mavs, we have seen throughout this postseason dominate the paint with their dual rim protectors and everything kind of filtering down from there. And so in a lot of ways, like the basic ideology of what the Celtics have built is in complete contrast to maybe the strengths of the Mavs that we've seen throughout the finals. And so in a lot of ways, it kind of makes sense that this is where we are. And when games down the stretch come down to this sort of thing, like the Celtics just have more of what the Mavs just can't stop.
Yeah, it didn't feel like an accident that when the Mavs were finally able to get off some threes of their own, specifically for their role players, that's when they made runs in this game. When PJ Washington was finally getting and taking and making threes, okay, all of a sudden it's a game. But until that happens, when it's Luka and Kyrie are the only people on Dallas' side that can even generate threes, Boston's path to those shots is just way too easy to compete with that. And I think that's what's so daunting about them is not necessarily that they are ideologically wired to take more threes than other teams, although I do think that's generally true. The combination of the spacers that they put on the floor and the ball movement and the ethic of ball movement that they practice makes it so easy for them to get those shots. That's where they beat you as much as anything. And we're saying all of this on a night where Kristaps Porzingis doesn't even play, where he's not even available, but they're able to make their spacing work with Al Horford and Xavier Tillman, and they just keep rolling.
Yeah, and to me, the Mavericks, their struggles on offense is the story of the series. The inability to get Boston out of their base defense is what ultimately doomed them to not be able to score, right? And again, I think because there was times where Siakam in the last round was just beating up on his matchup. He was just getting the ball in the post and scoring, like just bullying the guy that was guarding. There's none of that for Dallas. All of their creation is happening starting from 30 feet out, and a guy has to do 6-7 dribbles when he ultimately gets to the lane, or 6-7 dribbles into a contested step back jumper, right? I think if they had somebody, like I said, if Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford were the kinds of people who could beat up Jason Tatum for guarding them, to be centers, to be like, yo, Tatum can't guard me. I'm a center. Jason Tatum is a freaking guard or a wing, whatever you want to call him. He shouldn't be able to guard me. They don't have that. So everything they have to create has to happen at a distance. And Boston is one. They're staying super disciplined on the pick and roll where like they're not conceding switches when it's a disadvantage on defense. Very rarely are you seeing like Derek White end up on Luka on a bunch of possessions. Most of the times, Drew is just fighting over. Tatum's fighting over. Brown's fighting over. Now, if it's Tatum and Brown exchanging on the screen, then it's like, all right, cool. We'll concede that switch because we still like this matchup. Again, to me, that's just execution. Them not conceding that depending on the matchup. That's them like attention to detail, getting it done. And again, like Luka, I think where he separates himself from a lot of guys that have the ball, it's like he can actually walk a guy down with a post up and destroy him against the right matchup. He just hasn't been able to do that this entire series. Even when he is getting Derek White, it's like Drew's getting in there, mucking up the works. Like Dallas is just out of sorts on both ends of the floor. And I think, again, even when they did have advantages to press, like when Kyrie would get Big Al on him, like, you know, you would feel like, all right, that's something, immediately attack, get an opening, swing. They're not getting any of that going. And so they've been dominating.